Paymon who?
Mata Heyday.
Paymon Lata Heyday. Who is he?
Never paid taxes in 30 years. Fought the U.S. tax court and won.
See, I believe our rights come from God, not from government. Hello to my truth and freedom-loving friends. I'm Paymon Motahede, the president of Freedom Law School at freedomlawschool.org, who for over 30 years have not filed and paid any federal income taxes, and been teaching Americans like you to do the same legally and safely. In this presentation, we're going to have an interview with my most famous students, the former IRS gun-carrying special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, who defected from the dark side of the IRS to the side of the truth and light and freedom. This is part 2 of 3-part series, and in the last part, Joe Banister gave his background and how he ended up working for the IRS, and he ended up how to leave the IRS because they would refuse to answer his questions about the income tax legality issues. And we just touched on him being introduced to the We the People Foundation after he spoke publicly at Freedom Law School's 1999 Freedom Rally. So with that, let's welcome again Joe Banister. Joe, thank you for being with me once again to share everybody your amazing story.
Thanks, Paymon. Thanks for having me.
So could you give everybody a little bit more detail, Joe, about the Worthy People Foundation, a little bit more meat about how many debates you guys had, how it came about, and how that developed as, for a couple of years or so, what happened there?
Sure. Thank you. So reaching way back, as a reminder, I resigned from the IRS in February of 1999, and that was after almost 5.5 years working as an IRS criminal investigator that they call a special agent. And what happened was I left on February 25th, 1999. It was actually my birthday, as well as the ratification day, alleged ratification day for the 16th Amendment. So kind of an interesting confluence of the dates there. So shortly after I resigned in February of 1999, unbeknownst to me, there was a man named Robert Schulz, or Bob Schulz as he goes by, and he was pretty famous on the East Coast in terms of holding the government accountable, primarily taxation issues, but all kinds of issues. And he would take them to court. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was very, knowledgeable about the law enough to represent himself. And so Bob also had a talk show, and he was a talk show host. I forget the name of the station but I think it was like in New York City. It was broadcasted throughout New York City. And anyway, so Bob had this show, and he would talk about how to confront government and hold them accountable to the New York and federal constitutions. And so someone or some group of people told Bob that there was this IRS special agent that had resigned from the IRS, asking, questions and raising concerns about the federal income tax. And so Bob somehow got in touch with me and had me on his radio show. So maybe that was the spring or summer, probably the spring of 1999, March, April timeframe. And so I was on his radio show, and as Bob would typically do, he would ask his listeners or his audience, well, what should we do next? We've heard from this IRS special agent. He seems pretty credible. He's produced for us some evidence. What should we do next? And so the decision was made to have a symposium at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And Bob, again, I've always been astounded at how Bob can put things together, organize things and organize people, and it's just astounding. Anyway, so by July of 1999, Bob and his people, there were quite a few people that helped him. I mean, he really has incredible people around him who are dedicated to getting at the truth. Anyway, he and his group of people put together a symposium in July of 1999 at the National Press Club. And as I recall, myself, attorney Larry Beecraft from Alabama, Bill Benson, who wrote the book, 2-volume book, The Law That Never Was, about the fraudulent ratification of the 16th Amendment, Bill Conklin, who his expertise developed around the Fifth Amendment and the waiving of your Fifth Amendment right when you give the government assigned tax returns sworn to under penalty of perjury. And there could be one or two others, a few others I don't recall because it was a very long time ago. But anyway, that was July of 1999. And C-SPAN, which was a lot more instrumental back in 1999 because the internet was still fairly new. As far as I could tell, the internet kind of got started, at least began to be accessible in the early 90s. So here we're talking about, July of 1999. So the internet was still pretty new. And so our symposium was covered by C-SPAN. And C-SPAN is, watched by Congress, the judiciary, is pretty widely viewed in the D.C. Beltway area. So the symposium was carried on C-SPAN, and apparently it really got people's attention. So anyway, I'll take a breath, but I mean, that's what I recall about the first symposium that occurred in July of 1999.
And then I remember that Bob Schulz had invited in this symposium at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the commissioner of the IRS and also the head of the Department of Injustice, at least those two. He wrote to them, I think he wrote maybe heads of Congress, if I remember right, to send a representative to debate you and these 3 other individuals that you mentioned about the legality of income tax. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, and that's a big point that I overlooked that thankfully you reminded me of. It was absolutely designed to have a debate, to actually, Beecraft, Conklin, Bill Benson, Joe Banister, bring forth the evidence that we had gathered and be able to discuss, debate. The government officials could, of course, present their position. And, not that suspiciously to all of us who pay attention, they didn't show up. And I mean, I believe Bob gave them significant notice, and we went into their backyard. I mean, the National Press Club is just I think a block or two from the U.S. Treasury building. So we bent over backwards to make sure that the government officials were able to participate, but they couldn't spare a single spokesperson for our symposium.
Mm-hmm. They were so busy doing their jobs, they could not get one IRS or DOJ employee or lawyer to take just maybe one day off and come show us what we're wrong, why the people of the 50 United States have to file and pay federal income taxes. So, Joe, tell us what happened. Were there any more follow-up debates that were set up by Bob Schulz between you and other tax, truth, freedom experts and the government?
Many. I can't remember how many times I traveled back to D.C. Because, I was born and raised in San Jose, California. And throughout those years, prior to my, the prosecution situation, was in California. So I had to travel all the way from California to Washington, D.C. across the country. I believe the next symposium we had was in November of 1999. And as I mentioned, Bob was always very calculated in his efforts and all of our efforts. And I know, you were participating at some point, if not right there from July. You were participating as well to try to petition the government and get answers. And, together we bent over backwards, as I say, to try to get answers. And I mean, with all the tens of thousands of bureaucrats that are in Washington, D.C., and they couldn't spare a single one. But anyway, November of 1999, I think, was a follow-up symposium. Again, all of the government officials were invited. And to my knowledge, none of them showed up again. So, here we're talking November, August, September, October, November, 4 or 5 months later, after, as I said, the C-SPAN coverage of our July 1999 event caused quite a stir. It's not like we weren't noticed with our effort to get answers. And so in November of 1999, had another symposium, and government didn't show up. And we had, I can't count how many times, would gather in D.C. To just, go literally into their backyard and knock on their back door. Hey, we're here. Remember us? We're the people that you're supposed to be serving. And so eventually, and again, I won't be able to express accolades for Bob enough with the ideas that he had and the way that he followed through. But eventually, Bob came up with an idea of, again, to get the government's attention. Like, we really shouldn't have to work this hard to get their attention, but to fund, to buy ads in the USA Today newspaper.
Before we get to that, Joe, if I may just add a little bit before we close this chapter. Everybody, I know they did at least 4 of these debates, because I did not know about the first one, and I think I missed the second one. But the third and fourth one, I went from California to Washington, D.C. to participate and support Joe Banister and Bob Schulz in his efforts. And as Joe told you, these are the people that are supposed to represent us, we the people. They work for us. They are our employees, yet they feel they have no responsibility to even answer any question that are supported by a large number of American people. In fact, I remember Bob Schulz told me one time at one of these conferences that he had over 120,000 people on his email list, the We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education. And back then, email was big. There was no social media. Fax was on its way out a little bit. Email was in. So that's a large number of people who are getting the news and sharing it with more people from there. So that's when a guy named Mike Bodine, which Joe remembers, part of the close people of Bob Schulz, made a proposal to Bob Schulz about USA Today. That you want to get into that for everybody, Joe?
Sure. I'm glad you've got the background, because some of that is faded from my memory. But Mike was one of the many, and a really pivotal guy in Bob's, entourage. He had a lot of knowledge about how, networking and computers work, websites. And so Mike, and a great idea man as well. And so they decided on this idea to, if we put full-page ads in the USA Today, which, again, for the younger people, we actually had to live through a period when you didn't have social media. We did have websites, but, there were still newspapers, that are printed on paper. And so a way to get attention would be to put ads, full page ads in the center section of a nationwide newspaper. And one of those nationwide newspapers, probably one of the few, well, it'd be like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, has a national edition. But the USA Today was well known for having a national edition because in hotel rooms across the country, you would have a USA Today paper put at your doorstep. So anyway, there were a number of ads that were created by the We the People Foundation, Bob Schulz's foundation. And those ads were published in the USA Today over a series of months, if not years. And one of the ads, I know at least one, I was featured in along with two other former IRS agents. It was Sherry Peel Jackson, who was a revenue agent with the IRS Examination Division, and John Turner, who was a revenue officer with the IRS Collection Division.
In fact, I have in front of me, and on Joe Banister's website, you can download these for free. These USA Today ads, the four of them. Okay, but the first one, I remember, Joe, was in the year 2001, and Mike Bodine put up the $40,000 for the ad himself out of his life savings. That was his idea. And Bob Schulz said that was a good idea if someone we could get the money for it. And Mike Bodine said, bless his soul, he's in heaven now. He said, well, I'll do it. I'll put up the money. So because of Mike Bodine, the $40,000 back then, which was in today's money maybe $200,000, was put up to expose the government not answering our questions on USA Today. And then the next year, because of what Mike Bodine did, Bob Schulz was able to raise more money for more people to do more ads in USA Today, 3 more ads. And then the time came for the 4th ad in USA Today, and USA Today told Bob Schulz, sorry, no more ads for you. We don't want your money. Obviously, IRS and or DOJ must have contacted USA Today and told them, don't let these tax protesters get any more exposure. We can't afford to have the American sheeple wake up to realize they've been sheared. We just need to ignore them. Don't give them any publicity whatsoever. And so after that, Bob did an ad in New York Times, and then later on did another ad in American Free Press. And the very first one that was done, Bob, I thought was so interesting. In a way, it was, in my opinion, the best one because it captured some of the essence of what We the People Foundation was doing with you. Joe, could you read a little bit from us on that USA Today ads? What you remember, the very first column where they, share about the remonstrance, what the remonstrance was all about, what happened there, and then how that led to some kind of an answer from the Clinton White House at the time.
Yeah, and I really kind of get chills thinking about the efforts that we all went through, and really spearheaded by Bob Schulz. I really just and bringing up Mike Bodine, paying his own money for the ads. Talk about patriots. Talk about people that really cared about their country and cared about justice. But anyway, so Bob was very, as I say, well versed with courts and law, and especially First Amendment law, and he knew about something called a remonstrance, which is basically a glorified term for a petition. And, we have a First Amendment right to petition our government for a redress of grievances. In the Declaration of Independence, of course, there were all kinds of grievances that the king wouldn't listen to. So, our founders obviously realized that we need to have something enshrined in our in our Constitution to make sure the government, redresses our grievances. Anyway, so this term remonstrance was used by Bob, and working with Bob was like a history lesson in and of itself. It was really fascinating. So this remonstrance had, it made certain points in it, and we delivered the remonstrance throughout the three branches of government. And I know you yourself, right? We all went to our own representative and delivered a copy of the remonstrance to our own rep. And you were in Southern California at the time, and I was in Northern California, and so we went to our own reps and delivered them. And anyway, so the points of the remonstrance, for example, the first point was that the 16th Amendment.
If I can find me, Andrew, I'm sorry. Bob Schulz said, let's all drive from across America, everywhere. We drove in our cars from all over America to Washington, D.C. We met, and we all tried to deliver to our congressman our remonstrance, our petition for answers, face to face with our congressmen, House members. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the 2 or 3 people that actually got the chance to meet with my congressman. Jerry Luce was my congressman's name. His wife liked me, so she let me in as president of Freedom Law School to talk to him. And listen, of course, don't do nothing, but that's what it was about. You say, look, we need you to represent us with the people and answer us. Why are we giving our money to the federal government when there seems to be no lawful authority for the people to pay income tax, to the federal government? And that's what it was all about. So, and that's where now Joe's going to continue on. Please, Joe.
Yeah, I guess to not get too much into the weeds, but basically we, Bob Schulz and all of the people that, Paymon, myself, and thousands of others, as Paymon said, there were over 100,000 people on Bob's email list. And so this was a sincere, organized effort. And we, as the foundation of our sincere, organized effort, was actual evidence, such as court cases, actual federal laws, internal IRS documents. This was a well-oiled machine. We went to great lengths as citizens to do our homework and present, our best case for why we were concerned about the way the federal income tax was being administered and enforced. And so this remonstrance, was a great vehicle to summarize these issues and our concerns. And, as the First Amendment guarantees we're supposed to be able to do, we presented these concerns to our government officials who are supposed to work for us and who are supposed to answer to us and no one else. And so I guess, Paymon, you also mentioned about the experience of actually delivering the remonstrance. And so for myself, we delivered the remonstrance to all 3 branches of the federal government. And, your students and viewers are probably well aware of the 3 branches of government, but just in case someone might forget, there's the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches, okay? And the executive branch is headed by the President of the United States. So Bob and myself and Bob's videographer went to the White House to deliver the remonstrance to President Clinton. And, I'm not that familiar with D.C., and maybe many people are, but, next to the White House is something called the Executive Office Building. And I guess it's technically considered part of the White House, but it's not the White House that, everybody sees on TV. It's the Executive Office Building that's kind of next door. But as far as I know, it's still considered part of the White House because there's a lot of administration people that work there. So that's the building that Bob and I went to deliver the remonstrance. And we met with basically Bill Clinton's chief economic advisor. And his name was, and I think the man's still alive, Jason Furman, Fuhrman. And, again, Bob, you're going to get tired of me singing Bob's accolades, but I mean, he had already prearranged and scheduled a meeting with this man who was the chief, the head of Bill Clinton's economic advisors. And so we met with him in Jason Furman's office, and we presented the remonstrance. And I think actually on my website, I've got a video, kind of grainy, but a video of our presentation. And I had a chance to speak to Mr. Furman. And, so here we are in 2000, or was that like a 2000? And I'm telling Mr. Furman, I'm basically telling President Clinton that I had not filed a tax return, and I wasn't going to be filing a tax return, not out of some kind of civil disobedience, but because I truly, sincerely found no law that required me to do so. And that was a big incentive for me to want to get answers from the government that if somehow, I made an error in my analysis, then they could set me straight. And so to kind of cut to the chase, we left after, delivering the remonstrance to Mr. Furman at the White House. And shortly thereafter, he responded back to Bob Schulz, who continued to follow up, like, hey, what are you going to do about this? And Mr. Furman, do we actually have the quote? He said, "The legality of the income tax is not a high priority item at the White House, and we will not participate in any conference on the subject." So that was President Bill Clinton's top economic advisor. That was his conclusion to our very sincere, hand-delivered remonstrance.
Wow. Can you believe it, everybody? The audacity of the Clinton White House, the deep state, telling you straight in your face, look, whether income tax is legal or not, we don't care. We don't care at all. We're just going to take people's money, and we don't want to discuss it. Oh, I see. You sound like a thief. A thief doesn't want to discuss anything about his thievery, whether it's legal or illegal to take your property through deception or chicanery or force. They just want your money. That's a thief. That's a criminal. And of course, it explains why the White House does not want to have anybody come and discuss any conference on the subject of the application of the income tax to the people of the 50 United States. As long as they get to take your money and give it the powerful money special interest to buy off the politicians, right? They're happy. You dumb sheeple, just go back to what you're doing. Let us just shear your wool, take your money, just go back, and then you'll be just fine. Don't worry about it. Let's get out of here now, little boy. All right. So, Joe, but that led to Bob Schulz going on a hunger strike and then meeting a congressman named Congressman Roscoe Bartlett. Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, once again, Bob doesn't give up, and he's always got a plan. And he always, he seeks the comment from everyone that's working together to get answers. What should we do next? And so eventually, Bob decided that he was going to stop eating, to go on a hunger fast until we actually got a commitment for some government official to answer our questions and address our concerns about the federal income tax and all the evidence that we provided that it didn't apply to the average American. And so again, I'm a little bit fuzzy on the dates, but I know that the remonstrance delivery was like April of 2000. And I think sometime in 2001, Bob began his hunger fast. And I remember being one of the people that told Bob, please don't do that. But
you hunger fast to death. Is that what you mean to say?
Yes. I mean, he was committed to do it till death. And, I mean, me being a Catholic, we're all for making sure we get justice. And, but I mean, fasting yourself to death is, a little bit past the edge. But anyway, he did, and he fasted. I don't remember how many weeks that he went without food, and he stayed in Washington, D.C., and every day he would basically walk the halls of Congress and inform the congressional, the individual members of Congress what he was doing, that he had stopped eating and he wasn't going to start eating again until he would get some commitment from people that should be able to give him a commitment in a heartbeat, right? Because that's their job. And so for weeks, he went without food. And eventually, one of the congressmen that he spoke with was Congressman Roscoe Bartlett from Maryland. And one of the things that Roscoe Bartlett noticed about Bob and that Bob noticed about Roscoe was that they both had a pocket constitution that they would carry around. I believe Roscoe Bartlett carried it in his pocket. I know Bob did, but I imagine Roscoe Bartlett probably carried it in his, his coat pocket. And as far as I knew, Roscoe Bartlett was sincerely, dedicated to the Constitution. He can only do so much as one representative, but he was sincerely dedicated to the Constitution. So Roscoe would actually listen to Bob and hear Bob out and understand, the gargantuan efforts that Bob and all of us went through to try to get answers. And so what Roscoe Bartlett amazingly was able to do was to at least put some kind of pressure, or shall we say, at least get the attention of the Internal Revenue Service and the U.S. Department of Justice. And in July of 2001, Roscoe Bartlett was able to have a meeting with, the IRS and the DOJ. And as I recall, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, actually sent a guy named Dan Bryant to physically be at this meeting. The IRS, I don't think they sent anyone. They still couldn't spare a single employee to come to the meeting. But my understanding, so Dan Bryant, the DOJ guy, actually put in writing on Roscoe Bartlett's letterhead, pledging to provide DOJ attorneys to attend a taxation hearing where these issues about the income tax could actually be aired out, could be discussed, debated, and in public with the light, disinfectant light shining on it. The IRS, my understanding is the IRS agreed to appear at a hearing, but they didn't want to put it in writing. So, I mean, it just astounds me. The agency that I used to work for, they couldn't even have somebody show up in person in Roscoe Bartlett's office. The DOJ did, believe it or not. And then the IRS wouldn't put it in writing that they would show up. I mean, they demand people put in writing, figures on a tax return and swear to it under penalty of perjury by the hundreds of millions. But you couldn't get the IRS to agree in writing to show up at a hearing to discuss the income tax. Just incredible. But anyway, this was in July of 2001 that Dan Bryant from the DOJ and Orally from the IRS agreed to participate in a hearing about the income tax. So the hearing, I believe, was scheduled for, I think it was scheduled for November of 2001, I believe October or November. And the agreement was reached in July of 2001. Well, most everyone, especially those of us that have some white hairs, remember what happened on September 11th of 2001. And that was the 9/11 tragedies, and the buildings coming down and the airplanes, something hitting the Pentagon. Don't think it was an airplane. But I mean, the whole 9/11 tragedy occurred on September 11th, 2001. So all of the people at the DOJ and the IRS that had agreed to come meet at this hearing that was supposed to take place backed out. And they said, well, with 9/11, and I mean, again, us older people remember what it was like when 9/11 happened, and the fervor of patriotism, understandably, but basically the entire world, it all revolved around the attacks on 9/11. People would still go to work and, kind of carry out their lives, but I mean, the whole subject matter, the whole world was talking about 9/11. And of course, wondering if there would be other attacks, and then that followed with the wars in Iraq. And anyway, so a lot of turmoil. And so the DOJ and the IRS used that turmoil to back out of the hearings that we were supposed to have on the income tax in October, November of 2001. And once the IRS and DOJ slipped out of our grasp, slipped out of their commitment, they were gone for good. They did not, we kept trying, Bob kept trying to get their attention. Hey, you made this commitment. And then they just became, impossible to reach.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing all that. I'm afraid, guys, we got to do the rest of Joe's story next week, because after all this non-answers from government, you're going to hear next week about how the IRS tried to attack Joe to shut him up. But I want to share something with you guys. Mike Bodine put up $40,000, which is much of his life savings. He was a single guy, not a rich guy. He was just a middle-class guy, for the cause of freedom. Because he knew we have the truth on our side, but we need some money to get our truth out there. So one guy's $40,000, $200,000 back then, made a big difference. So that's why I invite you all to consider joining our Restore Freedom Plan. So as we the people, we have some funds to reach out to the American people, okay? Because bottom line, that's what it takes. You get money to get your word out there. Even in the online world of podcasters, that makes a difference. So consider, number one, stop flying and paying income tax by following our 7-step plan, which starts with the law. Follow the law. You can do it on your own for free, the first 5 steps, but step 6, on joining Restore Freedom Plan, is you being the modern-day America's founding fathers, okay? And put your money where your mouth is and be part of this winning track record we got. This time, we're going to go take it to the finish line and break down this corrupt house of order. We can do it, and that's why a Restore Freedom Plan makes sense. That you, instead of giving the money to Swamp, the DC Swamp, you keep 70% of it, the lion's share of it, and contribute 30% to Restore Freedom Plan. You get the money you need for you and your family to fight inflation, the better life that you deserve because your hard-earned money. And you choose. No one forces you to contribute 30% of that money that would have gone to the IRS, the crooks and criminals, the Restore Freedom Plan, to have America be back to freedom the way the founding fathers of America envisioned America to be, and it was that way for a long time before it changed. So If you haven't been to Joe's website, it's agentfortruth.com. Agentfortruth.com. It's USSA ads and more. Okay, will be at Joe's website. Okay, we actually take care of Joe Banister's website for him to make sure all this good information on there. These videos will be on there also at Joe Banister's website. So next week, folks, we're going to go and talk about how, yes, they couldn't stop Joe, even when they came after him with an indictment and a trial.